Welcome to day 5 of the Advent calendar. Let's see what's behind the door. A Christmas poinsettia. Grab your paints and let's get started. Oh, I'm excited to do our first botanical Christmas project. So I'm going to draw in the pot and then I am going to just sort of mark out the centre of where our poinsettias are going to go, and that's it. We don't want too much pencil, so I'm going to begin with a dilute red with my 3/10 brush, and I'm going to paint some rather large petals that just sort of overlap into that central circle. And I want them to be quite large but quite sort of long and pointed too. And I'm aiming for 5 petals, so there's going to be a bit of an overlap here, but that's okay. And you can see this is a good example of that the paper we're using is a kind of textured hot pressed, because it's not like amazing for blends, but it's brilliant for little illustrations, and that is why I've chosen it for this Advent calendar. Okay, so we're coming around, we're going to have an overlap, but that's okay. In fact, we're only going to have a little bit of an overlap, but you can see this colour is really faint. It's barely red, to be honest, but that is because we're going to be painting up layers on top in a stronger red. So I'm just going to mix a little bit more, and whilst I just wait for that to dry, I'll quickly say the brushes I'm using are pointed round brushes. You can find out more about them in the episode notes below, and as well as links to find them. The palette I use is called a Folding Loxley palette. Loxley is the brand. I've actually separated into 2 separate things for filming. I've got my putty rubber and I've got my HB pencil and a piece of paper just protecting my my advent calendar so that I don't get too much sort of fingerprints and grease on the page, because I want to make sure that each piece is nice and clean for when we start. So now I'm going to paint a more concentrated red, shorter, squatter petals in the gaps. And what's lovely is we don't need to do more than 1 brush stroke really, just to get these petal shapes. And this one here in the gap, and because this is a slightly bigger flower, we might need another brush stroke just to achieve that. But essentially what I'm doing is I'm using the belly of the brush and then squishing it down and then coming up to a point. And it's really down to you whether you prefer starting in the center of the flower like this and coming out, or if you prefer starting with the fine point, squishing down and coming into the middle there. It's going to neaten up some of my petals, but that's looking really nice. So whilst those dry, we can get our leaves put in. Now I'm going to use a mixture of Sap Green and green gold for the base of the leaves. My Sap Green is a little bit more bluey than a lot of others. It's the Winsor & Newton Artist quality one, but for some reason, I don't know if it's filming or whatever, it comes out quite blue. So I am adding in a yellowy tone, which comes in the form of my green gold here, to get a slightly yellowy green, but you might be fine just with your Sap Green on its own. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to first draw in some branches, so I know, well, there's not going to be many branches, but there will be a few. That'll do. Make sure your brush is clean. That still had some red on it. Whoops. There we go. Okay, and now similar to the leaf technique, we're going to paint in our leaves, nice and broad shape. And there may be times where you just need to sort of go around the outside and go around the poinsettia you've painted in. And now I'm going to paint in a few other leaves, just poking out from behind the flower there. And we need to let this all dry, and then we can put in lots of lovely detail. A poinsettia has a sort of green gold centre, so I'm just going to pop that in. You don't see much of it, but we will. And now we're going to add some nice strong concentrated detail to our leaves and our flowers. So I've got some Sap Green here, which I'm going to begin with. First, just to sort of edge and create a nice central line. And we can do a nice edge there, curve that in. This really helps sometimes if your blends aren't doing what you want them to. You come back in with a nice bit of colour. And then we're also going to add some stronger red tones to our poinsettia petals. Now, one thing I want to know, and do tell me in the episode notes, is a poinsettia a flower that you all know from around the world, or is it a very British thing? I've never really sort of known a huge amount about them. Okay, so we're going to do just some bits of red on the outer petals there, because they're the fainter ones. And then I'm going to take some Alizarin Crimson and mix it in with my Cadmium Red, just to get a deeper red colour there. And this time we're going to use the edges and just curl in. A poinsettia can be quite a challenging flower because there are lots of layers of these petals. But as long as you start nice and pale and translucent for those early wash layers, and you'll be just fine. Really lovely. And now I'm going to add some French Ultramarine blue into my Sap Green. We'll pop it here. Good and even stronger colour. So you can see with watercolour, it's all about starting off light and then you add in stronger and stronger colours. Just using my kitchen roll here to blot the colour out of my little brush to make sure it's nice and clean and ready for this different colour here. And now I'm going to use this darker colour to do some nice bold leaf detail, so I'm using quite a thick line there, but that's sort of what I want. What's nice when you're painting on a small scale, the level of detail can actually be quite basic. It's not about painting in every single line. It can be nice and simple like that. Okay, so a few things left to do. I want to paint in a pot colour, so I'm just going to use yellow ochre to paint a nice gold pot in, and I'm obviously not going to be covering the whole thing. I've got to make sure we don't disturb the leaves too much, so I've just sort of started in from the bottom. That's really nice. Slightly stronger colour along the bottom. I do like painting this style. There's something quite sort of expressive about this poinsettia. And then we're going to pick up some green gold, some quite concentrated green gold. If you don't have green gold, you can make it with sap green and cadmium yellow mixed together. In fact, I am going to put a bit of cadmium yellow into a green gold mix and really get a bright, vibrant green. Then place in the little filaments and anthers in the centre of our poinsettia. So normally, as I was saying, you build up layers with watercolour and it's very hard to paint in a light colour on top of something that's stronger and darker. However, there are certain paints that have more opacity, means they're thicker and can show up a little bit better. Cadmium yellow is one of those. So you can paint away and get that colour looking really nice. Last things, last bit of shadow. So mixing up blue and brown, and you can see each time you add a bit of one of the other, you either get a more bluey grey or a browny grey, but essentially you get a really nice range of colours with this shadow mix. A bit from underneath and then just a little bit under the leaves and under the pot there. And there we have your poinsettia.